INF.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Across Liberdade, the dial sits at 72 Fahrenheit under sunny. Wind check, southwest at 4 miles an hour. Welcome, architects of the airwaves. Today, we're drafting blueprints for the sovereign self, sketching out the inner structures that hold true. Asserting unwavering autonomy, we integrate logic and emotion to practice sharp discernment, separating toxic residue from architectural signal. A reel-to-reel stutters somewhere in the back room, then finds its groove. The board glows amber. Our first blueprint, the high-stakes diplomacy around India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Australia. The air vibrated with both rock-star welcome and sharp human rights protests. This tension tests the very autonomy of civic space.
Concrete facts surface quickly, Togee. In Sydney, thousands gathered at Kudos Bank Arena for Modi's address, a clear display of diaspora support. Simultaneously outside, Sikh and Kashmiri human rights advocates, joined by Amnesty International Australia, demonstrated against alleged democratic backsliding and persecution of minorities in India. This exposes both PM Modi's global image and Australian Prime Minister Albanese's balancing act between strategic partnerships and upholding international human rights norms.
The cultural weave here is complex. For many, Modi represents a resurgent India, a powerful lineage. But for others, the protests echo ancient calls for dignity and provenance, asserting that no leader's charisma should eclipse fundamental human rights. The image of the rock star welcome clashes sharply with the images of dissent, challenging which narrative carries weight next, who is truly seen.
It's like a dual-screen game, isn't it? One screen shows a hero's parade, the other, a glitch in the system where basic rights are being overwritten. The cost? It's paid by those whose voices are marginalized in the spectacle, their dignity obscured. A viable alternative would be for the Australian government to create official public channels for these protesting groups to directly present their grievances during such state visits, rather than just containing the protests.
Patching, in a caller, the critical thinker. You're on the signal.
Excuse me, Togee. You mentioned Australia balancing partnerships and human rights. What concrete leverage does Australia have beyond symbolic protests? Is there an economic cost to truly challenging India, or is this just theater for international observers? I need to understand the true structural vectors at play.
Excellent point, caller. That's sharp discernment. Australia holds significant trade relationships, particularly in critical minerals and education, which could be leveraged. The core tension is between economic expediency and moral principle. One viable alternative for Australia's government, beyond public statements, would be to initiate structured, private diplomatic dialogues with specific human rights benchmarks tied to future trade agreements, shifting from reactive protest to proactive policy engagement.
The chosen next move, aligning with building resilient civic architectures, involves Australian civil society and political leaders actively amplifying the voices of affected minority groups within India. This means funding independent human rights reporting from India, offering asylum pathways for targeted activists, and ensuring that any bilateral agreements explicitly include human rights clauses. This asserts structural self-worth beyond mere state-to-state relations.
From the grand stages of diplomacy to the hidden spaces where dignity is tested, we shift our lens to a stark image that challenges our collective conscience. Our next architectural challenge confronts us with raw exposure, a recent photo circulating depicting a bound Palestinian detainee. This image, visceral and disturbing, corroborates long-standing Israeli torture reports from human rights groups. It forces us to integrate logic and emotion in assessing structural violations.
The concrete facts are grim. The photo, verified by multiple independent sources, shows a Palestinian man blindfolded and shackled in what appears to be a stress position. This aligns with documented patterns of abuse detailed in reports by B'Tselem and Amnesty International, citing methods like prolonged solitary confinement, sleep deprivation, and severe beatings in Israeli detention centers, particularly in the West Bank. This exposes the Israeli military and security apparatus to grave allegations of systemic human rights violations, undermining claims of adherence to international law.
This isn't just a photograph. It's a symbolic rupture in the fabric of human dignity. It connects to a lineage of subjugation, where the body becomes a contested TogeeVision.com. The image itself becomes a cultural vector, challenging the narratives of justice and security that often overshadow the provenance of individual suffering. Who carries the weight of this image next? It's all of us, if we care about universal rights.
When the system resorts to such tactics, it reveals a fundamental flaw in its own architecture. It's a level designed to break, not to rehabilitate or justly detain. The game of interrogation becomes a zero-sum contest of power, stripping autonomy. A viable alternative would be for the Israeli High Court of Justice to mandate independent civilian oversight boards for all military and security detention facilities, with unannounced access, moving beyond internal military police investigations, which often lack public trust.
Call is on. Go ahead.
Togee, this photo is horrifying. But what's the actual cost of these alleged abuses? Does it truly impact Israel's standing on the global stage, or is it just another cycle of reports and condemnations that ultimately lead nowhere? Where is the accountability, the consent in this architecture?
Caller, your question cuts to the core of accountability and international norms. The cost is immense, not just in human suffering, but in the erosion of moral authority and international trust. This cycle of reports does impact standing, albeit slowly. One viable alternative to the current cycle of impunity is for the international community, through bodies like the UN Human Rights Council, to establish a dedicated, permanent investigative mechanism focused on documenting and preserving evidence of human rights violations in these detention facilities, with a mandate to share findings with the International Criminal Court.
The chosen next move, leveraging principles of consent and dignity, involves advocating for universal application of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, OPCAT, within Israel and the Palestinian territories. This protocol mandates independent national preventative mechanisms to visit places of detention. Implementing this fully would create a structural safeguard, ensuring internal and external monitoring and asserting the non-negotiable provenance of human rights for every detainee.
We have already run that tape. Here is the closed-loop takeaway.
The concrete facts are unambiguous. Multiple explosions rocked parts of Damascus just hours before or during high-level meetings involving President Macron and Syrian officials, including al-Shara. While immediate responsibility wasn't claimed, the blasts, targeting perceived symbols of stability, clearly aimed to derail the diplomatic overtures. This exposed al-Shara's fragile diplomatic credibility and the Syrian regime's inability to guarantee security even during a high-profile visit, casting doubt on any path toward reintegration.
The cultural narrative here is one of constant disruption, a myth of Sisyphus for peace in Syria. Just as threads of dialogue are woven, an unseen hand rips them apart. This isn't just about political figures, it's about the provenance of peace itself, continually undermined. The blasts signal that deep, unaddressed resentments and power plays continue to carry the day, leaving the civilian population to bear the cost.
It's like someone keeps hitting the reset button on a fragile peace initiative. The game isn't about winning, it's about maintaining chaos, ensuring no stable system can emerge. This undermines any architecture built on consent. A viable alternative to this cycle of disruption would involve international powers shifting focus from top-down diplomatic visits to empowering and protecting local, grassroots reconciliation committees across Syria, giving communities agency to build stability from the ground up, rather than waiting for state-level breakthroughs.
We've got someone. Patching in a caller. Go ahead.
Togee, if these blasts were meant to derail diplomacy, who benefits? And what does Macron's visit actually achieve if such a fundamental security failure can occur? Is this just another exercise in futility, or can we turn this confusion into actionable vectors for real change?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
The chosen next move, favoring resilient civic architectures and dignity, should focus on strengthening international accountability for attacks on civilians and diplomatic processes. This means robustly identifying and sanctioning entities responsible for such destabilizing acts regardless of their affiliation. Furthermore, supporting independent Syrian media and civil society organizations that advocate for local consent in governance is crucial, ensuring that the architecture of peace is built on the will of the people, not just elite negotiations vulnerable to bombs.
Prototype the fix.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.